Images are what make a site go from dull and boring to an interesting site people will want to visit. We'll look at using Photoshop files in Dreamweaver, doing simple rollovers, disjointed rollovers, and more. Let's get started. The images are waiting. Before we get started with this chapter, we need to define our site so we can see all of our files and our assets. So go over to your Files panel, choose Manage Sites, click New. This is going to be Chapter 5. We're going to go to our local files here. They happen to be on your desktop, Project, Files, and once on Chapter 5, right-click if you're on a PC if you would like and choose Select. I will go ahead and choose, and now I can click Save. Now click Done. Now you should be able to see your files in your Files view. Let's talk about our styles for just a minute. Now I will collapse some of my other panels here so we can take a look at these. Go ahead and click on your Assets tab, and you'll see because we have a site defined, in our very first little button here is our images. So all the images that are in our site, regardless of what folder that they are in, appear in your Asset panel. And I can click on them and actually see a view of them in my panel. The next button down in my Assets panel is my colors. So my colors of what I've used so far inside of my site. This is great to have up when you're building your CSS so you can make sure and use the correct color scheme if you're planning something new in CSS. My next button down is my URLs. I can see what URLs that I have selected and any external URLs that I happen to have in my files as well. My next button down is my Flash. So what Flash files am I able to see, and what Flash files do I actually have? If I pull my panel out far enough, I can see a preview of all of my Flash files. Shockwave is my next button down. We don't see Shockwave files that much anymore. They're really used a lot for gaming, and we don't have any games in our particular file, so we don't have any Shockwave files. My next button down is Flash Video. At the moment, I don't have any video in my file for this particular chapter. We will later on. Scripts is next, so any scripts that I might happen to have in my file, and this is where I would also be keeping any scripts that I might have that I've either created myself or gotten from javascript.com, or javascript.org, or some other location. Templates are a great way to work within a team environment. If I have at least one or two people that know Dreamweaver really, really well, they can set up the templates, and then your other team members that may not know Dreamweaver as well will be able to fill in just the content. This works great in a situation where you have different departments, and maybe the different departments are only in charge of certain parts of the content. That way you don't have to worry about them disturbing any other files that happen to be on the page, such as navigation, etc., and they can concentrate on just the area that they need to change. Next down is my library items. Library items are great. Now there's different ways to think about library items, but a good example of a library item would be your footer, your copyright content. So imagine that it is 2010 now. Next year, I might want to update my copyright. Do I want to touch every single page in my entire site, or do I want to go to one place and update that particular bit of information to the next year? That's what library items are great for. So you make your footer into a library item, and then next year when you need to update it, all you need to do is go to one place, update the library, and you have a brand new year inside of your copyright. Phone number changes, etc. work great for the library feature. We'll make sure and show you how to do that later. Click back on your Files view and go ahead and open about.html. So we just have a little bit of text here. If I put my cursor after leisure and hit my return key, We'll go ahead and put an image in here, but let's talk about the image types first. So what kind of images can you put inside of Dreamweaver? You can put JPEGs, GIFs, some people call them GIF, it just depends, either way is correct, PNG files, and Photoshop files as smart objects. There's many different ways to add an image into your document. We're going to start with our Insert menu. If I go to Insert and Image, I can simply put an image into my document. Let's go to Image and Objects and see the different types of images that we can place. So Image, Placeholder, Rollover Image, and a Fireworks HTML. Let's just choose Image Placeholder. An image placeholder is great for when you know that you're going to place an image into your file, but maybe you don't have your Photoshop file yet. So I can use an image placeholder for my width and my height, give it a color, and put some alternate text in here. The great thing about putting alternate text in here is that when I replace it with the actual file, my alt text will stay with the file. We're not going to put a name for this one. We're going to give it 75 for my width and 75 also for my height. We're going to give it a color, and I'm just going to choose something incredibly ugly. That way, if I'm looking at my files, I can see an incredibly ugly color staring at me, and I think, wow, I need to make sure and change that and replace it with the correct image. This is going to be all about beaches. Your alt text really can be anything that it needs to be for that particular image. You want to make sure and give it a description. Your alt text doesn't have to follow the same sort of naming convention rules that we've followed so far. So it can have spaces, capitals, and punctuation inside of your alternate text. Just make sure that it fits the description of the image. We put our alternate text on our images so that they can be accessible by screen readers. So if somebody who's blind is trying to view your website, you know automatically that they're going to know what the image is about, even if they can't see it. We'll go ahead and click OK. And if you take a look at your property inspector, you'll see that we have a width and the height for our image and our alt text. Now, replacing this is really very simple. If I twirl down the arrow for my assets and then for my images, I'm going to move this just over a little bit so I can actually see. We have a folder inside of our images called Small. And I will scroll down just a little bit. In your property inspector, where it says Source, there's a point to file, a little target. I'm going to grab that and I'm going to point it to my surfers. You scroll my page back over. So now I have my source, I have my alt text, beaches. If I want to change this, I certainly can. Maybe I'll change this to beaches with surfers. And I just click my enter or return key to make sure the field takes my changes. It's also not a bad idea to make sure that you name your images as you go along. If we need to make a disjointed image at some point, the dialog box that we'll be working with, you won't see the actual image. So you'll see a list of the images on your page. If you don't name your images, you'll just get an untitled image and you won't know which one to choose. So we'll just call this Surfers. So let's take a look at the rest of our options inside of our property inspector when we have an image selected. So we've already chosen the width and the height of our image. We have a source as well. We just chose the source for this particular image. And if I wanted to change it, I could just either point to another file or click on the folder and navigate to another file. We've added our alt text in. We could give an image a class style. Again, we'll talk more about CSS in just a little bit. I can edit that image in either Photoshop, or if I right-click on it, I can then choose whatever program I would like to edit it with. I've got some edit image settings here as well. and I can update from original. You'll notice that that is grayed out. It's not a Photoshop file, so I can't update from original. I can choose a border. My border is fairly important just because if I have this being a link to something else, if I don't have my CSS set correctly, if this turns into a link and I don't have a border, then I will end up with a border around my image thinking that it is a regular link, and it's going to put whatever color that I have for my links around the edge. So we'll just type 0 there. I can crop inside of Dreamweaver. I can resample that image. I can change the brightness and the contrast and change the sharpening of this image as well. I have some alignment features, so I can align to the top, bottom, right, etc. For the most part, we'll use CSS to change our alignment and not our actual HTML features, because that way we can update it through the CSS and not have to touch the image back on the page again. If I had a link for this particular image, I would have a target, and I also have a place for an original. So I could link this to an original Photoshop file. My VSpace and my HSpace is something that, while it's still in my property inspector, we don't use it much anymore. If I put a VSpace or an HSpace in here, for instance, I'll just put 5 for each, you'll notice that now I have a spacing of 5 all the way around my image, and that may not be what I'm after. Once again, CSS to the rescue, and any changes that we would like to make, whether we need space on the right, on the top, on the bottom, or the left-hand side, can all be done strictly through CSS. Changing our HSpace and our VSpace, and I'll just delete these, affects the code itself in the HTML. It's always better whenever possible to use your CSS. I also have the ability to map a file, and we'll do that in just a little bit. So that's one way to insert an image. We're going to go ahead and delete that one, leaving our cursor right there. From our file menu, I can take a file. I'm just going to grab one of the small ones again, and I can just drag that into my file. It pops up with my accessibility attributes for my image tag. This allows me to add some alt text to this particular file before it actually goes into my page. When we took a look at our preferences, we saw that we had a checkbox next to all of those options to make sure that we added our alternate text or accessibility options for our forms and our images, etc. So I'm going to type Pelican Island. And click OK. So if we look at our property inspector, we see that our source is our small image over on the side, and our alt text is Pelican Island. Okay, let's put our cursor to the side of that and hit enter or return. And if we go to our assets and our images, and I find my Pelican Isle _ small, I can either drag from here as well, or where my cursor is sitting in my document, I can just click on insert. And I'll just type that again, and there's my file. And if you happen to like keyboard shortcuts, let me just go ahead and delete this one. On the Mac, it would be Command and Option. On the PC, it would be Alt and Control I, and that will bring up my Insert menu and Image. Now I can just navigate to my Images folder, Small, and this time I'll pick Flower. When I choose, I still get that same dialog box that allows me to put my alternate text in. So when we put images in our file, we can either use our Insert menu, we can use our Files panel, or our Assets panel. Next, we're going to add a Photoshop file as a smart image inside of Dreamweaver. So in your File panel, find photowalks.html and open up that. If I scroll down just a little bit, I notice that I've got a space underneath where I'm talking about join us for our landscape photo walk in May. Over in your Assets panel, inside of your Images folder, there is a Photoshop file called colorcorrection.psd. Go ahead and just grab that and drag that into your document. At this point, we get an image preview that pops up, and it lets us optimize our image. Remember, it's a Photoshop file, so we need to optimize it. My options are JPEG, GIF, PNG 8, PNG 24, and 32. If you're not used to using Photoshop, you may not be used to optimizing images, and which type of image goes with which file type. This is a photograph, and it has continuous tones in it, so it works best as a JPEG or a PNG 24 because it has continuous tones. A JPEG and a PNG 24 can have up to 16.7 millions of colors, so that's why it works best with continuous tones. If I take a look at a GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, I only have 256 colors available to me. So this works best with big broad bands of color. I can choose my palette, adaptive, web safe colors. I can choose transparency or not. And by the way, my JPEG does not allow for transparency. So if I need to have transparency in my file, then I need to choose either a GIF or a PNG. Over in my preview window, at the bottom, I have my selection tool, my crop tool, a zoom tool, and whether I want to see my preview in 1-up, 2-up, or 4-up view. This allows me to choose different options for different windows, and then I can decide which optimization works best for this particular image. So we'll leave one window up as a GIF with 256 colors. I'm going to choose this window here, and notice the focus. I have an outline around this, and I will choose JPEG. We'll leave it at quality of 80. For this one, I'm going to change this to PNG 8. My PNG 8 is very much like my GIF or GIF image. I only have 256 colors to choose from. And finally, I will choose PNG 24. You'll notice with the PNG 24 format that I don't have any extra options. I either just choose PNG 24 or 32. So if I take a look at my image preview for each of these windows, I see that my GIF is 40K and it takes 6 seconds at 56K for it to download. If I click on my JPEG, I see that it's going to take 3 seconds and it's only a 19K file, so it's much smaller. My PNG 8 is a fairly large file as well, so it's 35K. And my PNG 24 file is the largest of all at 123K. So you can see from the size alone, most of the time, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but most of the time, your smallest file will be your best option. So we'll make sure and choose our JPEG, and then we'll click OK. Now it's going to ask us where we want to put that. So we're in Chapter 5, inside of our Assets, inside of our Images, and go ahead and choose Save. Again, making sure that my URL is relative to the document that I'm on at the time. And it's going to be inside of my Assets folder, in my Images folder, and it's going to be called colorcorrection.jpg. I can put my text here. And I will click OK. I'll scroll just a little bit here so that we can see with our image here, I have a green arrow. My green arrow is telling me that this is connected to a Photoshop file. If I go back to Photoshop and make any changes to this particular file, I can update it inside of Dreamweaver. If I right-click on this image, I can see that I can edit with a different program, or I can edit original. And we'll choose the original. And I'm just going to make one little adjustment in here. So I'll go to my Layers panel, choose an adjustment layer, maybe hue and saturation. I'll click on Colorize, And just move my slider around a little bit just so it looks a little more like a sepia tone image. All I'm going to do is save. I don't want to make sure and not save as, because you're going to lose that link back in Dreamweaver. So I'll save here. I'll move back to Dreamweaver. And now it tells me that this image needs to be updated. To update my file, now I can either choose to click the button over in my Property Inspector and update from original, or I can right-click and update from original. And now my file has been updated, so you can see how easy it is to use smart objects inside of Dreamweaver. We don't always have the luxury of having a Photoshop file to work with. Dreamweaver can make some changes to your file right here inside of Dreamweaver. If we go to meetings.html over in our Chapter 5 folder, we scroll down just a little bit, we have an image that's fairly large. Maybe we would like to crop that just a little bit. So in my Property Inspector, if I choose crop, it lets me know that these actions that I'm about to perform will permanently alter my image, and I can undo those actions by choosing Edit and Undo. I will click OK. So I have a little crop tool here, so I can basically come in here and do a little bit of cropping. And when I like my crop, I can just hit my Enter or Return key. Now it's cropped, and I can go and change some brightness and contrast. I get the same dialog box that pops up, making sure that my preview is on. I will add a little bit of brightness and a little bit of contrast, and click OK. The one last thing that we can do inside of Dreamweaver is some sharpening. We get the same dialog box, and with sharpening, you want to be very careful with sharpening. What you're doing is adding an edge contrast to the pixels inside of the image. When you add a contrast, you're also adding that contrast to the color in the image. So the sharper it gets, the more we get a sparkly feel to the image. And especially with skin tones, we don't want that. So be very careful when using the sharpening tool. And I will click OK. So those are the tools that we can use strictly inside of Dreamweaver. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at rollovers with swap image behavior. Over in your File panel, go ahead and open Rollover and Rollover N so you can see what we're going to accomplish. In the N file, if you'd like to go ahead and turn on Live View and just roll your cursor over it, you're also welcome to open it up in a browser if you'd like. We can see we just have some very simple rollovers. The text is in the rollover. So when we take a look at our next chapter and deal with CSS, keep in mind that we might want to keep the text live in CSS and use the rollover part as a background image. But for now, let's take a look at using rollovers as images. So I can turn Live View off, and let's put them in the file. So if I go over to my rollover.html, I see that I just have some content sitting here in my file. So I can delete my content out, and I see just have my cursor sitting in there. We do have that container as CSS so that it keeps it open and available for us. So let's go ahead and put our very first rollover in here. If I go to Insert, Image Objects, and Rollover Image, I want to give it an image name first. So this is just our Home button, so we'll just call it Home. Now I go find my original image, and in my Chapter 5 folder in Images, we have a folder for our rollovers, and just home.png, and I will choose OK. And in our rollover image, we need to go choose that, and that's my home over.png. It's going to automatically preload our rollover image. So when we use rollovers like this, our browser has to preload both the over and the regular state before it will function. Now I can put some alt text in. So I can just put home, and when clicked go to URL, I can either browse or type it in. So I'm just going to choose my index.html. Again, just making sure that I'm aware of my pathing, making sure that it's in the same directory that I expect it to be. Go ahead and click OK. And now I have my home button. Because we're going to be putting them in order, and in my container I have everything aligned right, when this first comes in, instead of trying to click beside it, go ahead and just use your right arrow to move your cursor to the side of that particular image. Then we're going to go back up to Insert, Image Objects, Rollover Image, and we're going to do the same thing again. So this one is About. Now notice for my image name, I'm not using a capital. This is what is in my property inspector when I name an image. And again, I want to keep it with my typical naming conventions when I'm using HTML and not start this with a capital or end up with any spaces as well. So I'm going to find my original image, and this is about.png, and my rollover image, and about over.png. Now my naming conventions might seem ridiculously simple, but keep in mind that you may not be the only person to ever touch these files, so you want to make sure that it makes sense to the next person, or to you 6 months later. Put my alternate text in here. Maybe make that a little bit more realistic, about snapshots. And this time, I know that all of my files are in the exact same directory, so I'm just going to type about.html and click OK. And we'll go ahead and finish this up. Image, image objects, rollover image. This one will be meetings. I'll find my original object there, and now my rollover. And when clicked, make sure I am choosing the correct thing, and I will say OK. We've just got a few more, so image, image objects, rollover image, photo walks. I will find the original. The over. Put in my alternate text. And browse for my URL. So you can see just putting a basic rollover image is fairly simple. So simple, in fact, that we might want to tackle a disjointed image. So if you go ahead and open disjointed and disjointed end, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit and turn on my live view. So when I mean a disjointed image, instead of just a rollover, my disjointed portion of that is that when I roll my cursor over some image, then another image pops up. So you can see in the end, when I roll my cursor over each of the thumbnails, then the actual full-size image of it shows down below. This is a great technique that can be used in a variety of ways. For instance, on my home page, I could use this technique to show what might actually be on that page. So if I'm rolling my cursor over a menu item, then there's another portion on my page somewhere that's showing what is actually on the particular page. It's a great technique and clients love it. So let's move over to disjointed.html so we can actually make this happen. So we have our thumbnail images in our document already. We have a blank spot already for the rest of our images. Then there's a few things that we need to set up first before we do that. So in the actual thumbnail images themselves, if I don't name them here, when I go over to my swap image behavior, I'm not going to be able to figure out which image I'm going to swap with what. So let's go ahead and name these properly first. And notice that I am clicking my enter or return key after each time I type something into any field inside of Dreamweaver, just to make sure that it takes what I've typed in. I'll click on flowers and on pelicans. Windmill. And now we can put in our blank image. So to make this work properly, what we do is we put in a blank image first. We name our blank image. All of the other images that are then going to swap with the images that we have here need to be the exact same size as our blank image. So I've got an image here. Now I could maybe have the windmill, for instance, ghosted back, and then when I roll my cursor over it, you see it in full color. And then when you click on it or roll over it, then the actual full-size image appears. It really depends on how you want to accomplish this type of technique, or the application that we're going to use it in. So now I put my cursor over here where we're going to add our blank image. And I either can find that in my assets. I do have a folder for our disjointed images. Let me scroll this over just a little bit farther so I can actually see. So I can just grab the blank and put that in its spot over here. And I'm just going to say blank image for swap behavior. And I'll click OK. Because it's blank, I'm making sure that my alt text actually goes and uses something so that if somebody is using a screen reader, they understand what that particular image is for. If you look at your page, you'll notice that that particular image, when I have it selected, is over just a little further than the rest of the images. That's because when I put my cursor in and used my return key, it added the paragraph tag, which is now wrapped around my image. So this is a great example how I can use my tag selector, and I see that I have my P tag here. If I right click on it, I can actually remove that tag. And now when I scroll back up, it's on the same X coordinate as the rest of my images. So with that selected, I need to give it a name as well. So that's just going to be blank. And now I need to make sure that I have my behaviors up. So just in case, go to your window menu and behaviors. Scroll that down just a little bit farther. Also notice that when we click on one of our images here, we want to make sure that each one of these has a link symbol in it. It's not going to go to a URL, it's not going to go to another page. It's just a link so that we can add the actual behavior to that particular image. In my behaviors panel, go ahead and click on the plus and choose swap image. Now, had I done the rollovers, just put an image in my file and wanted to do a rollover instead of doing it from my insert menu to begin with, I would do the same thing with it. I would go to swap image and then swap that with the other rollover portion of the image. So now that we have this dialog box up, you see how it's so important to make sure that we've got everything named correctly so that we know what we're doing. Because otherwise, I only know that I have that surfer picture clicked on because I see it over in the side actually selected. So I'm not going to choose the surfer image here. If I wanted to create a rollover with it as well, then I would choose the surfer image first, choose an overstate, and then go to the blank image. But we just have our blank image at the moment. So I'm going to go to my blank image. I'm going to click on Browse. And in my Images folder, in my Disjointed folder, there is my surfer image. And again, it's the exact same size as my blank image as well. So it's going to preload my images, and it's going to restore the image on mouse out to the blank state. So when I roll my cursor off of it, it goes back to looking blank again. It doesn't keep hold of that particular image. I'm going to click OK. And now we see in our behaviors that we have a on mouse over swap image and on mouse out. If I wanted to change this particular behavior, notice that I've got a long list of things that I could choose. So I could say, for instance, on click, so it wouldn't actually work until it was clicked on, but we're going to keep this on mouse over. And then it's going to swap image restore on mouse out and go back to our blank image. And now we can click on our flowers image and go to our behaviors and choose swap image. Again, making sure that I'm choosing the blank image and not the actual flowers image. I would only be using the flowers image if I were using that as a rollover as well. Choosing blank, I will browse to the image then it goes with the flowers, the larger image. I will click OK, and then we'll go to our next one. Add a plus, swap image, go to my blank image, and we will choose the pelicans that go with that. We'll click OK. Now we'll select our very last one, our windmill. And again, the plus and swap image, choosing our blank image, and now our windmill. So now we can click on either live view and see it here inside of Dreamweaver, or if you would like, you can go ahead and preview in your browser with this particular button right here and preview in your browser of choice. When you roll your cursor over that, now each corresponding picture, you should be able to see where the blank image was. If it's not working exactly right for you, go ahead and go back to your behaviors. Double click on your swap image for that particular image itself. Let me turn live view off. So for instance, if windmill wasn't correct, I would select it one more time. I would double click swap image and make sure that the right image was then selected. So now we've learned how to do simple rollovers and a disjointed rollover. We're on to image maps next. So now that we've taken a look at making rollovers and disjointed rollovers, let's take a look at doing image maps. In your Chapter 5 folder, there's an image map _end.html and an image map.html. Let's go ahead and open those. If I take a look at my end file, we just scroll down a little bit here, I see that I have a map. And on that map, I have several different locations. And the goal is to have the user click on those individual locations and actually go to the corresponding page for that particular location. Because this is one image, instead of trying to cut it up into tiny little small pieces and try to make those match and actually work inside of a browser, we use what's called an image map or a hotspot. So when I click on my little blue circle here at the moment, I see that in my property inspector that there's a link attached to this. And when I click on each individual one, each one has its own separate link. So let's go over to imagemap.html and make this. So I'm on imagemap.html. I see my map, and if I click on it, you notice that I have also named this correctly. So I always make sure and name my images when I place them on my page. That way I don't forget about that later on. So with my image selected, at the bottom of my property inspector, I see where there's a map. I have several different types of hotspots: rectangular, circular, and a polygon hotspot. Depending on my image and where I actually want to create a hotspot at, or an image map, I can use any of the three The third one, making my own individual shape. So for instance, if I wanted to create a shape that goes with that particular state, I would make sure and use that one. So we'll use all three just so you know how. An image map needs a name. So I'm just going to simply call this map. Hitting my enter or return key. My image is selected, and now I choose which one I want. So we'll start with a rectangular hotspot. And if I click, hold, and drag, it tells me I need to include my alternate text to make sure that anybody with a screen reader is able to understand what I'm trying to accomplish with my page and the particular link that we have clicked on. I'll click OK to that. Now that's going to come up every time we do a new hotspot. So now my property inspector has changed to reflect the fact that I have a hotspot. So I've got a link. Automatically, regardless of whether I am going to choose something else or not, it automatically puts just a # in to make sure that it's a link. And this is Denver. So I'll say denver.html. And maybe for my alternate text, I'll say visit our Denver location. Remember making your alternate text exactly like you would want a description. So if I were describing this to somebody who couldn't see it, how do I want that described? Now let's use our circular hotspot next. And I will circle around New York. The same dialog box pops up, making sure that I'm putting in the correct description into my alternate text. We'll give it a link of ny.html and putting in my alternate text. Maybe I'll say something a little different in each one. So now let's try out our polygon. So I grab that one, and for this one, let's do St. Louis. This one works just a little bit differently. So each time I click, and my dialog box pops back up again. Each time I click, it's going to give me a little segment. So I can work my way around a particular point of interest, or in this case, my map. I don't necessarily have to finish and go back to the original anchor spot. For those of you who are used to other graphic programs, I'm not making an actual shape here. I'm just defining the general area where the user's cursor is going to turn into a hand when they roll their cursor over that particular hotspot. So I'll call this St. Louis. Keeping in mind my naming conventions as I type for anything that's going to be associated with HTML, and putting my alternate text in. And we'll just call that the St. Louis group. And then we could always finish up with putting all of our maps around the actual image. Adding either a rectangular, or a circular, or a polygon hotspot. That way, if I have a complicated image like this, using an image map and adding my hotspots is a fantastic way to make sure that I don't have to cut up my image, and I still get the point across to the end user being able to click on each individual hotspot and go to the particular page that they're looking for. In the next chapter, we're going to be looking at designing with CSS.